I wrote verses 13 through 20, but we're going to read only verse 13 through 16. Hear now the good news of our Lord and Savior. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. It's the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world, and you are a city on a hill. Those are amazing statements that Jesus welcomes us into this morning. And these are proclamations, and they're just amazing to me. Because what they say to me is right now, every one of us in this room, every single one of you, you are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. You are a city on a hill. Jesus in this portion of Matthew isn't telling us that someday, given the right training, after reading enough books, after attending enough outreach meetings, you may someday become the salt of the earth or the light of the world. No, it's not that. He isn't saying someday, maybe, hopefully, you can grow into this. Jesus isn't saying, I hope that you will all be the salt of the earth. It is my deepest prayer that you are the light of the world. That's not what Jesus says at all. He doesn't say, I expect this from you. No, he's just simply making us a statement, a fact about who we are. This is your identity. Every one of us here today, all of the Christians around the world, Christ has said, you are the salt of the earth. You are a light unto the nations. You are a city on a hill. To simply be a follower, to simply call yourself a Christian, to be baptized, is to say that you are salt and light. And so the question going forward when we read this passage is not so much, how can we become salt? That's not the question here. It's not how do we gain this identity, because we already are. It's like I don't have to find a way. I don't have to come up with a way to be a brother to my brothers, to have that identity. It's who I am. I'm a brother. They are my brothers. I didn't do anything to become a brother. The part I have control over, the part we have control over, is the type of brother that I'm going to be to them. That's where I come into play. Am I going to be loving? Am I going to be supportive? Am I going to drop everything to be with them? None of that changes the fact that I'm a brother. It just says what type of brother I'm going to be. Or I can choose the other way and be a terrible brother. That's up to me. Not the fact that I'm a brother. And the same is true for us as salt and light. not whether you're going to be salt and light. It's what kind of salt and light are you going to be in this world? Are we going to be the salt and light that is for good or for ill? Are we going to be the light of the earth that illuminates, or are we going to be the light that blinds? Are we going to be the salt and light that enhances or destroys? Today I'm just going to focus on salt, what it means for us to be the salt of the earth. And I'm going to focus just on two qualities of salt as we experience it each day. And what those qualities of salt mean for us as we try to be the best Christians we can be, as we try to live out this calling of following Jesus. But before we get there, I think we need to break down why this claim, the claim that you are the salt of the earth, is such a radical claim for Jesus. Because when Jesus said these words, the people's worlds were shattered. They were flipped upside down. Jesus picked this statement with the utmost care. So I want to break it down because I think we miss the importance of salt in this world, or maybe importance isn't the right word. I think we miss its worth, its value. You see, right now, salt is found in abundance. You never have to worry about running out of salt. And if you do, you can go cheaply buy some at the store. I mean, if you've gone through the cabinets back there, you will see feels like there's 150 salt shakers in those cabinets back there. We are not lacking salt in any way. It is not a special thing. You go to any person's kitchen table, and there's a salt and pepper shaker. And if you go to where they keep the nice dishes, there's a salt and pepper shaker. The Christmas dishes, there's a salt and pepper shaker. We have salt everywhere. I was watching Rachel Ray the other day. If you don't know her, she does some cooking. And Rachel Ray does this thing with salt, and I'm sure maybe many of you do this, but whenever she adds salt to any dish she makes, she throws it over her shoulder onto the ground. We have so much salt that we just throw it on the ground for no reason. We don't understand its worth or its value. But that's not the way it was for Jesus in his time. In fact, when Jesus was roaming the earth, salt was one of the most precious commodities around. It was one of the most expensive things in the world. It was so valuable to the people that they thought it would ward off evil spirits. It was so important to who they were that they would put salt over religious contracts and religious covenants as a way of sealing them, as a way of protecting them and holding them. It was used to ward off all types of disease and sickness. At points during Jesus' time, the Roman soldiers, were actually said to be paid with salt. Could you imagine? Just here's your block of salt. But that's how important it was. There's a book by Mark Kalansky, and I didn't read all of it, but I read some excerpts, and it's about salt. He wrote a whole book about salt. And there's a point in his book where he goes on to say that wars were won and lost based on who had the bigger supplies of salt, because of all the things that salt could do. It's used to preserve foods, to enhance food, to deepen those flavors. Back home in Minnesota, we throw ice on our roads for about 6 months straight to melt the ice. But for us, we can get it cheaply, we can get it quickly. But for Jesus in this time, imagine he's saying this: you are the cell phones of the earth. You are the gold bars. You are the diamonds. You are the most precious commodity to people. This is what Jesus said to the people who had gathered around him as he proclaimed the Sermon on the Mount. This is the second part of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you are the salt of the earth. It was those whom Jesus had gathered for the Sermon on the Mount that heard these words. And who was gathered for the Sermon on the Mount? It was the poor. It was those who were mourning. It was the meek, the weak, the merciful, the peacemakers, the pure in heart, the persecuted. It was those who were hungry. It was those who were thirsty. It was those who were sick. It was those who were lame. It was those who were crippled. It was women, it was children, it was men, it was all who were considered outsiders. Those who gathered to hear Jesus say these words, you are the salt of the earth, were those who on any other day were told that they were worthless. It was those who were told on every single day, you're not a precious commodity. Jesus stands up and looks at all of these people who are seen as worthless every other day. But today Jesus says, you are one of the most important things in this world. Jesus, as he has a habit of doing, just flips their world upside down. Imagine somebody who had been poor and crippled and weak and beaten down every day coming in Jesus saying, you are so valuable. You have no idea how valuable you are. Jesus placed value, extreme value, unmeasurable worth upon those who the world called worthless. That's a gospel message. That is the good news. Because Jesus didn't say, even you who are poor, even you who are mourning, even you who are oppressed, you can someday maybe be worth something. He didn't say, if you try hard enough, you can be worth it. No, he said, you're worth it right now. You are the salt of the earth. And the gospel message, the good news for us is Jesus is still saying that to us each day. Jesus is saying to us, you are the salt of the earth. You are the most precious, valuable thing there is. Even if the world doesn't see it, Christ sees it. He is still calling all of us precious. So again, I say, the question for us to look at with this passage is not how do we gain this value, not how do we gain this worth, but what do we do with it now that Christ has proclaimed it for all of us? What do we do now that Christ has called us the salt of the earth? And so what can we learn about how to live as the salt of the earth from actual salt? I want to give us two quick lessons. And I think the first lesson salt has for us is that salt is meant to support and not dominate. And I think this is a pretty obvious characteristic of salt. Salt is this beautiful seasoning that when done right, you don't know it's there. Nobody goes, wow, I love the delicious salt you added to this meal. No, they just know that there's salt there and they can taste the natural flavors that salt has brought out. But meals can be ruined because someone didn't add enough salt. You know it when there's not enough salt in something because the first thing you say is, this could use a little salt. We say it about everything. This could use a little salt. Salt can take a boring vegetable and it makes it dance on your palate. You know that experience. It can add a little kick. I don't like to eat a plain tomato slice, but if you put a little salt on it, there's nothing better than a slice of tomato with just a little bit of salt. A sprinkle of salt can liven up any dish. It can make the dish reach its potential that is already there. It can bring out the natural flavors. It can bind together everything necessary. But so too can salt dominate. It can destroy. It can make food inedible. It has the ability to take something that is otherwise great and destroy it. Put in too much salt and you know the dangers. Salt fails when it tries to dominate the meal. Salt fails when rather than enhancing the natural flavors, it just tries to mask them, to overshadow them. To be the salt of the earth, I think, is to be bold enough in our proclamations about Christ that we are noticed but we do not destroy. That we are noticed but we do not overwhelm. That we are so vital that the dish would be lacking without it, but not too prevalent that that's all that they notice. We are called to help people grow in their faith and not to smash it down. We are called to build people up and not tear them down. We are called to bring healing and not destruction. We are called to be essential in this world, but not at the expense of the whole, not at the expense of individuality and things like that. I think all too often we as Christians have been the salt of the earth that wants to dominate. We're known too often for hurting and not healing. We are known for being hypocritical and not truthful. We are known for being exclusive and not inclusive. To be the salt of the earth is to boldly go out and proclaim the gospel into a world in order to enhance it, to make it a better place. Not so that we can subdue it and be in control. To make people's lives better and not worse. That's the first thing I learned from salt, is that salt is meant to enhance and not dominate. But the other thing I learned from salt is not only can it be used to enhance a dish, but also when you use the right amount of salt, it still has the ability to not be effective. Have you ever been eating something and hit a salty spot? It seems to happen to me when I've made cookies before or when I've had scrambled eggs. You may be going along and the cookie is perfect, and then you take that one bite, and there is just a big clump of salt in that one bite. A chunk of salt that wasn't sprinkled, but it was clustered together. It's a terrible experience. You see, salt fails when it clumps together. It doesn't do its job when it isn't willing to spread throughout the entire meal. Which makes sense. If a recipe calls for a teaspoon of salt, and you just put in one big chunk, a teaspoon-sized chunk of salt into one corner of the recipe, it doesn't do its job. There's the right amount of salt in it, but it's all together. And it's ineffective. You see, salt is meant to be scattered. It's meant to be sprinkled. Salt is worthless when it just sits and congregates together. A writer, Debbie Thomas, puts it this way. Salt isn't meant to cluster. It's meant to give of itself. It's meant to share its unique flavor in order to bring out the best in all that surrounds it. Which means that if we want to enliven, enhance, deepen, and preserve the world we live in, we must not hide within the walls of our churches. Salt enhances, deepens, and preserves things. But we got to get out of the salt shaker to do that. We have to get out into the world. We have to mix with it. We have to be a part of all of it, not just in this little section. Because that's not how salt is effective. We got to be a little bit here and there and everywhere so every single person can hear the good news of Jesus Christ. Salt is meant to be sprinkled, not to cluster. And so I finish with this. We are the salt of the earth. You're the salt of the earth. You can't do anything about it for better or for worse. Christ has called you the salt of the earth. And now we have to choose what kind of salt we want to be. Do we want to be the kind of salt that enhances the world or destroys it? And my hope and prayer is that we as Christians around this world want to be the type of salt that preserves life and doesn't dominate it. Let's be the type of salt that melts the ice on people's hearts. Let us be the type of salt that turns a normal slice of tomato into a delicacy. Let us be the type of salt that when we're not there, people go, well, this could use some salt. This could use some of those people at Rehoboth. This could use some of those Christians. This place needs a little salt. Let us be the type of Christians that people say, this place needs them for us to be who we're called to be. This place needs a little sprinkling of them so that we can grow in our faith. Let us be that type of salt. A salt that without them, the dish just falls flat. Because you are the salt of the earth. There's no changing that. So let us be that valued possession, that most valued possession that God has called us to be. Let us be the salt of the earth for better. Amen.